drugs, flower children, and the phrase, "Ain't it strange," were topics of the day. I am a person who became a radical hippie, if you could put the term radical to hippie. I wore tan leather vests with fringe hanging from the armpits and chest, drove around in a white Studebaker with flower decals on the tops and sides, and I fought for equal pay. My hippie years were complicated by the abuse I took from my alcoholic parents and the diseases of paranoia and depression. I drank excessively and experimented with drugs, and I felt like a failure most of my life. At 21, I became a patient who ended up in the Oregon State Hospital, hiding in the halls, watching the patients with manic depression, schizophrenia, panic and anxiety attacks walk aimlessly, mumbling and yelling to themselves, drugged out of their minds on medication. While I was in the hospital, I wanted to express myself artistically and prove myself to the world. However, there were no paints or paintbrushes. Have you ever been to the Oregon State Fair? I have, but I didn't get to ride the roller coaster. One day, a patient pulled me aside and said, "I got to get out of here." And I said, "I'm coming too." She led me down a tunnel in the basement, and we ran pushing wheelchairs with broken wheels out of our way and kept running to the end of the tunnel until we ended up at the Oregon State Fair. We bummed money for rides, and I really wanted to ride the roller coaster. However, my companion took all of her money, went to a telephone booth, and called the Oregon State Hospital and turned us in. The attendants came and carted us away and took us back. I didn't get to ride the roller coaster that day, but what I realized what was going on in my mind was a far greater, more exciting, more complex and longer lasting ride than any roller coaster ride at the state fair. In the asylum, I was served a regimen of Thorazine daily, and I took it religiously. When I got out of the asylum, I jitted. I went around like a zombie because I had 14 hours of sleep a day, and I could tell that the medication wasn't working. So I went off my medication for a year, and I blossomed. I became a bar waitress. I discovered my passion for women's equal rights. I became a stripper. I hitchhiked. I went to jail. I figured then that maybe things weren't so fine. On one of my journeys, I hitchhiked from Ashland to Huntington Beach, California by myself, and I ran into the ocean, coat on, clothes on, and I figured it was a pretty good idea at the time. I met Gene Joyner, who was a hippie on the beach, who saved my life, and he built a fire out of a lifeguard stand to warm me up by. And yes, we share the same last names, but he's not the Joyner I married. I was hospitalized 4 times between ages 22 and 26. I remember when I was 22, I was strapped to my beds. I was losing my mind and unraveling at the seams. I eventually went to court, and the judge banged his gavel and he said, "1 month in the institution for Sherry." Looking back, I figured it was a pretty good idea at the time. When I was 26, I started musicals, and my brain was racing, and I had all this excessive activity and energy. And I thought, that memorizing my lines too quickly caused me concern. I was scared because I didn't know what was happening, and I thought that I was becoming psychotic, so I crashed with pressure. Now let me tell you about the joiner I married. Remember Gene, who built the fire out of a lifeguard stand to warm me up by? Well, I met his brother Joe, and we fell in love, and we lived together right when I was coming apart. He became my mainstay and my emotional support. In my psychotic world, I took 2 wooden boxes and took Joe's Newberry's photos, the kind of photos you get in the Newberry store, and you put a coin in a slot and out comes your photos in a strip of paper, on a strip at the side of the booth. I took 2 photos, taped it to the boxes, put a penny in the box, and confessed to him because I thought he was a priest. Then I built voodoo huts with toothpicks to hex Joe. I was unraveling and having filled with all this activity and stimulation. It was like I was at a senior citizen center and all these elderly ladies were sinking their hooks into my head, trying to crochet a coaster out of the follicles of my brain. What was real was no longer real, and what I call my sanity remained a vacant lot in a hardcore world of reality. After I was hospitalized, I was 26, and I said, darn it, no more. I'm not going back. I'm not going to go back off my medication. I came to the realization that I needed medication and to take it regularly, and that I needed to create a wellness plan for myself. So I decided I wanted to help people with cancer, stress-related diseases, physical disabilities. I became a certified nurse's aide and applied at a nursing home and fed patients, walked patients, and took care of their special needs. And took care of patients with end stages of their lives. I worked through my problems, I worked through the depression and the paranoia, and I blossomed like a flower in the garden. I kept blossoming, and I wanted to build more self-confidence and to become stronger. So I joined the Oregon Society of Artists, and I painted. I painted all the colors of the rainbows. I painted with violet, light green, yellow for my high moods, and deep purple, deep blue for my low, intense moods. And I searched for the beauty within and painted away the past judgments, the inner conflicts, the depression that possessed my mind at the time. I'm so happy I did this because I was ready to face one of the most difficult periods of my life that I could ever imagine. My mother and brother passed away within a year of each other. She went by suicide, he went by AIDS. Many people with my condition of paranoid schizophrenia would have gone the other way and would have not have gone back to the hospital because of this tragedy. But I didn't. I worked through my problems, I adjusted, and I learned to cope. I remember my mom, how she was a licensed practical nurse, and how she took care of people when they were sick and was an adopted grandparent. One day when I was young, I was sliding across the wooden kitchen floor, and all of a sudden a big long stick went through the bottom of my foot. and she pulled it out tenderly and carefully, splinter by splinter, and treated it with mercurial comb. Even though my mom was somewhat abusive and she had a drinking problem, I incorporated the good stuff, like caring for the elderly and becoming an adoptive grandparent. I remember my brother, how when I was very sick and I was 21 years old and I was going into the asylum, I was upstairs in my room crying my eyes out. He came upstairs and he brought a bowl of chicken noodle soup and put it on my lap. He knew right then what was going on with me, and he had made the soup himself. He was 12 years old, and he was very tender and loving. I tried to paint like the masters, and I did a painting that like Renoir had done with the woman and the dog. I used the colors of alizarin crimson, viridian green, indigo, white, black. I see the woman in the painting. She is much like my mother. She wore makeup and lipstick. I remember one day when my mom got up in the morning to adorn herself in the mirror, she put on this red lipstick on her lips. My mom was also an oil painter, and she bought me books of Renoir and Van Gogh to paint from. There was a dog in the painting, and dogs are so healing for people with mental illness. That's why I painted the picture, because of the dog. I had a dog named Dinky who came down from Panama with the Sweetheart Sweetie, and she was a Cocker Spaniel. When Sweetie was sick and dying, Dinky saw me crying, and he put his paw over my right eye to stop me from crying. And I knew then that I had acceptance and love and incentive to go on. I painted like the masters, and I painted that painting for a closure for my mom's death and the death of my dog named Dinky. And looking back on my painting, it was not necessarily expressing myself artistically that helped me out, but it was working through my problems and dealing with the tough times of my mother and brother. I blossomed again, and I found a mental health care team that supported my mental health care decisions. Do you remember when I said that I worried about memorizing my lines too fast and how I was having all this excessive energy and activity? Well, I'll tell you the rest of the story. I found that the episodes I was having were manic episodes, and I met Dr. Ward T. Smith from Summit Research in Portland, and he helped me with the original diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and along with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, which became the diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. There were many ways that I learned to heal, and I asked myself, how could I do better? I wanted to write, and I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know how to write, and I didn't know how to write a book, and how I could get it out to the world, and how I could get it published. So I remember myself in the four walls of my tiny bedroom beginning to write my memoir. I had an idea. I thought that I'd go to this writer meeting, and Julie Fast was speaking that night, and after her presentation I came up to Julie and I said, "Hi Julie, I'm Sherry Joyner, and I'm so happy to meet you. I've heard so much about you. I am writing a book called Sherry Goes Sane, Living a Life with Schizoaffective Disorder, and I want to help people with schizoaffective disorder and people with mental health disorders. And she said, great, that sounds wonderful. This book has got to be heard. Then she said, have you heard of NAMI? And I said, no. And she wrote down NAMI's name on a sheet of paper, and she gave me a contact number. It doesn't seem possible that after 36 years later, and I was 62, that I'd be walking through the doors of the psych ward as a NAMI presenter and not a patient. I can remember when I was a patient, I was cramped and sweaty and shaky, and the air was moist and the environment was foreboding. I walked, in comparison to what I experienced when I returned as a teacher, I taught a meditation exercise in a comfortable, bright, and clean room. People were receptive to me, and I could help people with mental health disorders. I became a NAMI Inner Voice presenter. Do you remember the hippie who drank excessively and who smoked dope and was 21 and couldn't function in society? Look how far I've come. I still get sick, I still get depressed, I still get psychotic, but I have a wellness plan that I refer to, and I work through my problems, I deal with my problems, and I'm so happy to be here. That girl who's 21 years old that I described hiding in the halls of the mental institution without a paintbrush or paints to express herself, searching for ways to relieve the fear, the anxiety, and the stress. I have paints, I have paintbrushes, I have freedom of my mind. As the flower begins to blossom on my palette to my canvas, so do my relationships. They bloom as I maintain my relationships every day. I capture the petals of the flower, the warm smiles, the simple gestures. Reality speaks to me in dimensions and the colorful lessons of the past. A new me, a new subject, a new painting is born. I'm taking care of my life, and so can you.
Thank you. Can you wrap it up?